Hello and welcome to this awesome speedrun of Even the Ocean by Half Coordinated as part of Disability Awareness Month tonight. I will be your host, Skybills. As a quick reminder, GDQ Hotfix is brought to you by viewers like you. If you are enjoying the GDQ Hotfix programming, please consider subbing to the channel. If you have Amazon Prime, as a reminder, you do have a free sub. Please consider using that free sub on this channel. A couple announcements. AGDQ 2020 volunteer schedule will be released on the 31st. That's tomorrow. And speaking of tomorrow, all day we will be having a Halloween marathon from 1 p.m. to midnight Eastern tomorrow. Very excited about that. And without further ado, we have Half Coordinated here. How are you doing, Half?
Hi, I'm doing pretty well. As Sky so wonderfully introduced, I'm Half Coordinated. So my name is actually sort of functional. Half of my body is coordinated, basically. I have a physical disability called hemopharesis that lowers feeling and coordination on the entire right side of my body. So I actually play games better with my one hand doing all the controls rather than with two. This game is Even the Ocean. It's a game that came out in 2016. We're going to be playing what is known as Gauntlet Mode, which just does puzzle platforming sections of the game and leaves out most of the story, which is kind of exploration visual novel style. So it won't really spoil much of the story for you, and I'll make one up for you probably. Let's see. I do have to. It has speedrun options. I have to show these just for like if I happen to get a PB. But it also has like a lot of accessibility options, and that's relevant to today, I think. So there's actually a lot of settings, like you could float instead of having to jump. You can make it so you can't die. You can make it so you have double the health. You can give extra helper blocks for easier platforming. A lot of neat stuff like that this game actually has, and this was before that was super common. So I'm really, it's just a nice feature. And I think I'm ready to go. Are you ready, Sky?
Absolutely. Count me down, Half.
Okay. And 3, 2, 1, go.
All right. Good luck.
Thank you. So, to explain this game, first off, that bar at the bottom is my health. It is a balance between light and dark energy, or green and purple. The more purple it is, the faster I can move horizontally, and the more green it is, the higher I can jump. Right. However, if you go above 100%, so if I take any more purple damage right now, you die. So it becomes a pretty strict balancing act. I do also have a shield that I can use to block shots and do various other small actions with by holding it in different directions, which I can lock it in a direction by holding down the X button or any shoulder. I tend to use a shoulder button. Oh, that was my fault. So, let's try and balance this back out. Okay. Be a little careful there. Let's see. So since this is for Disability Awareness Month, there are a few things I'd like to talk about. So maybe just a little bit of personal history, for example. So I mentioned, I have hemopharesis. I've had that since birth, but I haven't always played games one-handed. My right hand basically has coordination. Think if you were wearing a mitten at all times, and about what you could do with that, sort of. It's not a perfect example, but it can get you in the ballpark. And so I basically like playing Nintendo and Genesis and things like that. I pressed the wrong button a lot, but I still played. I am using my palm to steer left and right. But and anyway, so no one really teaches you how to play one-handed. That's something, at least back before, when internet hadn't become just a daily thing, really, that everyone is connected to all the time. I kind of had to teach myself, and I didn't really teach myself to do that until PlayStation 2, because I had a Nintendo, and then I had a Genesis, and then I had an N64, which is designed for 3 hands, so that was something right there. And PlayStation 2 just had the right layout for me. It's the general layout that most controllers have had for a long time since, with, sure, the alternating stick height being a little more convenient for me. But, and even then, teaching myself that how to play this way that you currently see me playing, I thought a lot of games were still like out of my range, particularly like, say, shooters. But if you've seen me play Vanquish or Earth Defense Force or anything like that, you'll know I was wrong. And there's just a lot more than you can do than you might expect a lot of the time.
So what was the first game you learned how to speedrun, Half?
The first game I learned how to speedrun was actually a shooter, which I guess goes back to that other point that I had just made. It was Rage by id Software. It was a bit silly of a choice. Like, no one was really running it, and a lot of what I saw from speedrunning are like, I enjoy routing and just figuring out a game on my own. A lot of the time, it's really nice to have someone to bounce ideas off of, but I really like to be part of the routing process. And so I kind of just chose that game and ran with it. It's definitely not a game I'll ever go back to. Second game was actually Super Monkey Ball, which probably makes a lot more sense to most people. I did run that for a good while. And then third was Vanquish, which was the first thing that I ran at GDQ years later. This is one of the few glitches in the game. You can slide past elevators on this stage only, because otherwise they're not lined up in a way that actually works. So I'm a power plant repair person. These calibration bars are what I'm putting in kind of to repair the power plant. If the ball going back and forth hits any hazard, then it breaks. So we want to avoid it taking damage. If you can also outrun it so that it doesn't spread out and it can't take damage until it catches up to you.
So why did you pick up Even the Ocean, Half? What really stood out for you about this game in particular?
So this game, that's a good question. A friend on Twitter did a little bit of beta testing for this game, I believe. And they had actually pointed out a good number of the accessibility features that it does have. And for those that don't know, I also do some work as an accessibility consultant for games. So I just thought that was really neat. And then I'll be honest, I kind of forgot about the game for a while. And then I was trying to find a new speed game, or just a new game to try and play. And I was looking through games that I had purchased, and I had picked up this game in a bundle at one point on itch.io. And so I gave it a try, and I really enjoyed it. It controls really well. It's very, very chill, which I enjoy just as an aesthetic. And yeah. You notice, so like the smoke does sort of like constant damage to you of its respective color. These big lasers, I can't block, but I can bounce off of them, and that's helpful.
Well, it appears, half in chat, we have one of the two devs of Even the Ocean right here.
They are, I would consider them friends, so that's not a surprise.
Oh, that's awesome. How
Sean.
did you meet your friend here?
By playing this video game, of course. I've run this game quite a bit, and they showed up during my casual playthrough, actually.
I very much enjoy, this is one of my favorite components of speedrunning, when the dev is very hands-on and gets to know the speedrunner well, and there's this awesome interaction back and forth between that. Sometimes we'll see that with the music designers too of certain games, but to be there with the devs and just kind of have this back and forth conversation about the game, it just provides for a very unique speedrunning experience that not everyone gets the chance to experience.
That's very true, and there's an amusing story with that. It will become relevant a little later in the run. There is a technique called shiny wall jumping. There are metallic walls that you're generally not supposed to jump off of casually. And I just went over one, so you'll probably see that when it caught up. But you can jump off of them if you do a Metroid-style wall jump, where you collide with the wall with a bit of force and then press away and jump. And that was intentionally put in as a nod to Metroid series, but it never tells you about it. You're not supposed to find out about it casually, and no one found it. And so basically Sean told us about that technique. So if we didn't have that close relationship with the developer, probably would have never known that I could do a few certain skips. And it's like the closest thing that looks like it might be a glitch, but it's not. It's intentionally in there. Yeah, while I say it's done Metroid style for those wall jumps, they're actually harder. There's a tighter time window for it. But a lot of this run's routing comes down to energy balance, just knowing how much damage to take where, so I can continue to move quickly.
We have a little bit of a question from chat here. What is the plot of this game? Because most people only seen it when you've streamed it in gauntlet mode.
So we are the light and dark energy. That's actually, so we're okay. I need to step back 1 second mentally. So we're a power plant repair person, right? And the power plants actually harness light energy from the earth or ground, what have you. And for some reason, the power plants are getting damaged, and we're going out to repair them. Normally, the repair people wear this giant suit that is very immobile, and I have no idea how they get through these areas without being able to jump around and like we do. But something happens to Aleph, the player character, early on in one of those suits, and it gets damaged, and we're actually just using a shield, which is actually the breastplate of one of those suits instead the entire time. That's probably extra detail, but regardless, the power plants are being damaged, and we'll see more about that later, and maybe I'll continue like the actual story at that point, or I might go with my made-up one.
Also, speaking of which, there was a link that was just posted in chat by Ahmad. Yes, the game is on sale on Steam right now for Halloween as part of their sale.
It absolutely is. It's 70% off. It's also on sale on itch.io. which if you buy on itch.io, you get a DRM free copy, and you also get a Steam key, and generally the developers get more money when you buy there as well. So I like to encourage that when possible. I'm currently playing on the itch version.
This is another interesting, more about your experience with the speedrunning community. Zephyr asks, have you had any social difficulties from being disabled in a gaming community? We all know some people can be toxic just because you're different. If so, how did you overcome it? Thanks for your positive attitude.
That is a good question, and one I hadn't been thinking about, because it's very true, I definitely have. Thankfully, my experience with the speedrunning community has been very positive. Relative to some others, I had some difficulties in some more competitive, more directly competitive communities prior. I won't name names here, just to be polite, of what communities. I think in some ways it's a little easier for me because it's one of those things where, hey, I can just easily prove that I have my place, right? I can keep up with pretty much everyone, so it's pointless, but not everyone has that luxury. And that's something I hope that a lot of people will be more understanding for in the future. And if maybe you've kind of thought that way previously, after you watch this, just think about it a little bit more. And maybe you'll come to a good conclusion to be a little more accepting and understanding.
Also, too, not only in the game communities, there is a lot of cross-community love. You know, there's a lot of people who play Mario games that are friends and can have great relationships with people in the Castlevania community. We're not limited to the games that we speedrun in terms of who we spend time with. So there's a lot of people in the bigger picture of things that are very supportive of that type of thing. So, again, not looking at the isolated games communities, but at the big picture, I would say a lot of people, if not most, are very accepting.
Yeah, generally so. I think a good example of that, of someone that's a very good friend of mine, is Bob the Ninja Goldfish, who has been a commentator or a host for GDQ several times. He doesn't speedrun at all, but he's definitely a good friend. That doesn't matter. You don't have to. Just be decent. Decent and understanding. So, one thing that, oh, by the way, these bubbles, they're often used for switches, and they also, while you have a bubble around you, you can't take damage of that same color as the bubble. This kind of skips this entire room. So when you're at critical dark energy, which is 90% or more, you do get a massive speed boost, which I'm normally at. And it also makes the movement much harder to control. A few people that have played the game in chat can probably back me up there, because you get a ton of momentum. And that can make some of the more precise movements more demanding. Or was that? Go ahead.
We've heard from the devs that the 3-year anniversary of this game is next month already. Oh my goodness, I did not realize it was already 3 years old.
Yeah. I didn't realize it was actually, I thought it already passed, but no, that's next month. Okay. Nice. It's a really nice game. I really enjoy it. I will warn that the story overall does get pretty sad. The real story does get quite sad, but it's a worthwhile story regardless. I didn't explain anything about the wind. The wind does push you in the direction it's blowing, surprise. It does it more so if you're holding your shield kind of correlating to that direction. However, if you have a bubble around you, that's kind of nullified, that you just get pushed more while you're in a bubble regardless. So you'll notice the dialogue boxes are going away very quickly without me mashing anything. That is one of the speedrun settings in this game, is that dialogue automatically clears itself very fast without you having to press a thing if you have that setting turned on. I appreciate it a lot. So we're to the point of this level where we're actually fixing the power plant. These power plants really would fail any OSHA inspection at any time. Gotta tell you. But the wind is definitely playing a big part in this room in particular.
Someone made the pun. I was thinking it. I didn't say it. They said even the OSHA violations.
Even the OSHA violations.
Oh my goodness.
It's very good. It's very good. Oh yeah, and these are mirror puzzles, so you're just realigning mirrors to do the last of the fixing for that power plant. So now we're going to Riverton, which is known colloquially in my community as the Chamomile Mountain Dew Zone, because the water kind of resembles Mountain Dew. But the level is so calm that it can't just be regular Mountain Dew. It's Chamomile Mountain Dew. Slam back a Chamomile Dew, gamers, and get in the Zen Zone to win that tournament.
Yeah, the colors in these games in particular, now that you mention it, they're definitely stand out versus most games. They're so vibrant. I mean, we have the purplish border, and then, as you said, we have the Chamomile Mountain Dew.
Yeah, a lot of the levels sort of have a dreamlike quality to a lot of portions of them. And that really, I think the music assists with that. The music in this game is really strong in enhancing that chill vibe that we've mentioned. So there's an interesting mechanic that I'm just abusing right there. If you enter water but don't press down ever, the game has two swimming states, or water states. It has a swimming state and a bobbing state. If you never press down, you stay in the bobbing state, and when you press upwards, the game will try to rocket you back out of the water. If you press down, you'll go into swimming state, and you'll kind of just move slowly around in the water instead.
So there were some questions also, not just about speedrunning, but also about streaming. When did you first start streaming, Half? And did you start right away on speedrunning?
I believe I did start right away with speedrunning, yeah. I started in late 2012 is when I first started streaming. And that was with those aforementioned Rage speedruns. Yeah, that's correct.
So do you play games casually on stream as well, or do you mostly speedrun?
I do a fairly even mix of both these days. I used to do almost exclusively speedruns, but I just enjoy games too much to not have a good time casually with a lot of games. I've definitely done a lot of casual playthroughs lately. Oops, I took too much damage. This is going to be a little awkward, but it'll be okay.
Yeah, I was going to say this section actually looks pretty difficult. You're put into tight jumping quarters here.
Yeah, you can avoid all those. I actually wanted to take like a small amount of damage, but let's see. Okay. That'll fix it. These bulbs here on top of switches, most of them do almost no damage, like the most minimum amount of damage possible. but there are a few that do like a full 10%, and I don't think there's any indication of which are which. You just have to know. So I was kind of balancing myself for one of those that does happen to do more damage.
Yeah, everyone's complimenting the music right now, and it is some of the best music I've heard in any game by far.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the big pros to running it. By the way, if you want to get into speedrunning, I highly suggest you pick a game with good music, because you're going to hear that music a lot. And that can help a whole bunch with having to do the game over and over. One thing that's kind of amusing, because I've played with moving the control stick with my palm for so long, I did try a setting that allowed me to kind of reach the D-pad with my thumb instead with this game. And by the way, those were shiny wall jumps. Those were the hard, difficult Metroid-style wall jumps right there. I tried a setting where I could potentially use the D-pad, and I was actually more precise with my palm on a control stick than I am with the D-pad, and that I've just been doing this for so long. It's kind of silly, but it's true. So here is a giant cow. We're blowing purple vape smoke at it. It doesn't appreciate having the vape smoke blown at it, so it wanders off. Kind of insults it. It insults our sick vaping skills, and we get upset about it, and we talk to the mayor, Richard Biggs, which, what a name.
That is quite the name.
It is.
You sometimes look at little details in the game and you wonder what are the stories behind some of this? You know, there's just some things in the game that you just don't want to take for granted, or you don't want to assume where things came from, but there's so many things in which you wonder what was the developer thinking when this choice was made or that choice was made.
Yeah. So I call these things chasing me around ghost dogs. They also kind of look like cats. It depends on if you're looking more at the eyes or the mouth. But there was one stream where I kind of blurted out, "I'm Ghost Dog Jesus," because I corralled them so well. So that stuck with me. They're ghost dogs. And they do a standard 10% damage if they happen to come in contact with you. So one question I do get sometimes, and might have already been asked, or would probably get asked later, is is there a game that I just haven't been able to play or I can't play? The answer is generally yes. But the better question to ask is, are there games that weren't worth it for me to try and play? And a lot of those would be mouse and keyboard games. Because I can't work both of those at once, but I can use separate programs to map both mouse and keyboard functions to a controller and then potentially play. There was a period in college where I was roommates with someone that really liked League of Legends for some reason, and I did give that game a try for a while, and to play that game, I actually had mouse settings mapped to both control sticks. One control stick I had it on low sensitivity mouse, and the other high sensitivity mouse, so that I could both quickly move the cursor around the map and do more precision bits with the other control stick. And that becomes not worth it. It technically worked, but it becomes not worth it at a certain point. And So I think that's generally the better question. And there are even like smaller things, like say if a shooting game doesn't let me switch the shooting and crosshairs off of the triggers and onto bumpers, that becomes not worth it for me, just because it's more of a strain on my hand. While there's definitely a lot of games where, yeah, maybe I couldn't even play them to a point where I'd have enjoy them, have fun, and have it not be so much work. It's kind of just a survival thing but I often block them out of memory because, well, I can't play them. I better not think about them and just get upset about it. But I try to be a little better about that because it also is important to advocate for better options.
So do you feel like options have gotten better as time goes on, Half, with some of the newer games you've been learning?
Yes. Overall, custom controls are much more on gamepad are much more common than they used to be. It's still not in every game, but it's a lot better than it used to be. A lot of other settings, like people are learning how important like visible text and subtitles are, although there are a lot of games out there that still have tiny text that need to work on that. But I think the industry is listening accessibility-wise and implementing a lot of different features that can make a huge difference for a lot of players.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to develop a brand new game in terms of accessibility?
Oh gosh. Okay. First, talk to disabled players. There are multiple consultants working in the field, including myself. And we're here to help you. We'll try and tell you what your game might possibly need. I need to go the other direction first, excuse me. Well, we can't, force you, of course, to include anything. We can tell you what might be the best idea. And a lot of features are actually pretty easy and are part of like debug tools that you would already have in the game. You just need to make a UI for people to actually access them. Different various things. Like even like some of the oldest things like difficulty levels are technically an accessibility option. It's more of a band-aid one, but technically. Like I would advise start looking at accessibility early, talk to a consultant if you can. There are great websites such as accessible.games, that's the actual URL, and game accessibility guidelines. I think it's .com or .org. I can't remember it off the top of my head. That list a lot of different features that you should keep your eye out. Like how big should your text be? All these sorts of things to help you stay on task for it.
In terms of hardware, do you like the controller that you use, or do you feel like something better could be developed for you and for others?
So I really like the controller that I'm using. It is a Razer Wolverine. I used to use the Razer Wildcat and kind of switched over to the Wolverine recently there. So what it has over other controllers that is really nice for me is it has 2 extra buttons at the top, and I'm actually using one of those extra buttons for my shield. But I can map that as any other input on the controller. It also has triggers on the back, but I can't reach those. So I just have them set to nothing. They can be set to null inputs if need be. but I've always wanted buttons there because all my fingers are already up there pretty much. So it's really nice.
Yes, and for anybody listening as well, Alice Spider gave great advice in chat. Says it's easier to design for accessibility from the start than try to put it in or implement it in later. And I think that's great advice for any kind of dev, because if you create with accessibility in mind, it's so much easier to work on it. Whereas if you just try to add it on to something, it's not going to work quite as well.
There's a good chance that you might have already coded yourself into a corner, basically, if you try and start later. And you might still be able to implement, but it won't be as smooth as if you were to try and start earlier. A game I consulted on, Way of the Passive Fist, they brought me on super early, and just had we had a meeting and we talked about all the features I think they should try to include, and that made a big difference for them. So they already had a roadmap basically at the start of what to consider. So they knew to consider color blindness with their character designs, and knew that a high contrast mode would be helpful for various vision impairments, things like that. They had that idea from the start and knew what they should do to achieve that.
So, do you tend to run newer games because of that, Half? It makes perfect sense if that's the case.
In some ways, yes. Like just controllers themselves, newer controllers are much more accessible for me to use. I don't tend to need a whole lot of accessibility features, and I often circumvent the need for them with those 2 extra buttons that I mentioned. Because as long as the controls aren't too wild, and I can sort of just set a few things to those extra buttons, I'm generally okay. But there's also, I would argue, for a lot of newer games, because knowledge is a collective thing, and that includes game design. A lot of game designers learn from those older games and will actually pull off a lot of stuff that you love about those classic titles with a higher proficiency. That might rub some people the wrong way. I'm not saying old games are bad. Some of my favorite games ever are older titles. Gunstar Heroes, for example, is still a favorite game of mine. And with I also just really like indie games as well, and there's a lot of unique experiences to be had through indie games, and I appreciate that.
Also, too, if you want to talk about the story a bit, Nulset says also Half has credit in Celeste for helping out with its robust accessibility options. Do you want to go into that a bit?
So I actually didn't do anything with their assist mode directly. They already had those settings. They did that part without me. The part I actually helped with was their original text introducing the preamble, basically, for assist mode. Had some language in it that sort of talked down, unintentionally so, to people that actually need it to play and be able to complete the game. So I, with, let's see. I'm forgetting their last name, so this is why I took a pause. But with Kathy, who is also now in the credits there under special thanks with me, we rewrote the preamble, and they liked what we did. This was during the whole difficulty and accessibility discussion that kind of erupted when Sekiro was released. And Matt Thorson, they made a post saying what a Sekiro assist mode could possibly look like, and I actually brought up that those problems with the assist mode preamble at that point. And they said, oh yeah, we should probably take another look at that. And I was in full on like advocate mode, you could say. So I just took it upon myself just to rewrite it and just kind of toss it out there at them after that. And they DM'd us. Kathy Jones, thank you. Your hair, Kathy. Thank you. I'm so sorry for forgetting your last name.
You are trying to play and read at the same time, Half. No worries.
It's true.
We do have another interesting question here in chat from Code Kaiser, who says, wouldn't it be more convenient to have a controller device that intermediates the accessibility barriers between disability and games? Kind of like how macro functions, or am I being naive?
So this depends on your disability. The thing about accessibility is there is no one best solution, right? What's best for me is not going to be best for a lot of other players with disabilities. Like, say, for a lot of players, the oh gosh, I forgot the exact name. It's not called the accessibility controller. The Xbox thing. I'm forgetting, because words are difficult. Words are impossible.
No, words are fine. You're doing great right now. Actually, a lot of people in chat are complimenting you on your ability to answer these questions while playing a speedrun all at the same time. And I'll tell you something, that's difficult for any streamer to do. Don't let them tell you otherwise. And chat says adaptive controller?
Adaptive, yes. The adaptive controller is a great thing that definitely has helped several people already. It's one of the main go-tos now that Able Gamers tends to use in their packages that they send out to players that need, along with other things with it to fit their specific need, because that's a part of it. It's an adaptive controller. It can have a bunch of different parts attached to it. That wouldn't really help my situation specifically, but that doesn't make it a not valid thing. It's still a super valid item, and I'm super glad that it exists.
Another thing, it says, if Kevin says, I mean, if you could figure out how to use it in a game, couldn't you figure out one of those mouses? I don't know which one to use either, honestly, that have like 80 buttons, at least for one-handed.
So most of those aren't left-handed, for one, and that's a big sticking point. It would have to be a left-handed mouse, but most MMO mouses are right-handed mice, so that's kind of a problem. So technically, yes, that's a potential thing. I don't think I would be as comfortable with that as I am with a controller, but that's definitely something that a lot of people do actively use.
And as a follow-up here, Code Kaiser says, in regards to the previous discussion, wouldn't it be easier to have different devices for different disabilities that works across all manners of games instead of every game trying to adapt to all the varying disabilities at the same time? I feel like that would be very difficult to do considering the different genres across games and the different platforms.
So here's the thing, both are good. It doesn't mean, just because the adaptive controller, for example, exists, the adaptive controller is basically what they're suggesting, that does not make oftentimes a player may just encounter software barriers that the new hardware just allowed them to meet. So they would still be unable to access various parts of the game or have difficulties that are, well, unfair and just could be easily avoided had the developer taken a little more consideration. And there are various settings, of course, color blindness, of course, things like that. You can't fix that with a controller. But again, like, a controller doesn't fix everything. It is a intermediate between you and the game, but you still have to interact with the game itself.
Yeah, and this is another interesting point too. Lead Savior says, for example, a mouse with a gazillion buttons won't help any delayed processing speed reaction time. It's true.
Yeah, exactly. So options to slow the game down, for example, are very good in that regard. In this game, if you're worried that, like, oh no, this looks like it might be too fast for you, you don't have to go this fast at all. In fact, it's kind of discouraged. But it's fun to go this fast. I'll admit that.
And when it comes to speedruns, there's nothing wrong in general with going what's called like a speed jog instead too, just to learn some of the fundamentals of the game before going the maximum amount of speed possible by world record holders, for instance.
Yeah. So these levels, I haven't been mentioning the level gimmicks very well because we've been having good discussion, and that's fine. Kind of the gimmick of this stage is these green doors with arrows on them will lock my shield in that direction. So I can't block various hazards because my shield is locked away from them. So I kind of have to work around that. Thankfully, there are a couple skips that I can do with the shiny wall jumps that I mentioned earlier on.
I think the discussion's been fantastic so far. Are there any points of the game that you wanted to cover right now, Half, that we missed before we go back to audience questions?
So right now, if we're continuing the story, I think I'm going to go with my joke story. We blew our vape smoke at all of the giant creatures, and all of them disgraced us. So we got so upset about it that we're going to collect bombs and make them explode. Which is probably not a good reaction, but that's what my joke explanation of the story has gone to. So we're in the middle of collecting those bombs.
Have we entered the most difficult stage or the most difficult tricks yet, or is that still yet to happen?
That depends. So there are definitely difficult parts throughout. You can tell this stage in particular, the gimmick is reflecting various things. I think the last stage is probably the hardest stage, but we won't be there for a little while yet.
I guess another thing to consider too, again, getting back into the discussion the chat is having, is some people are talking about as well, maybe make something like button mashing less of a priority too. There's different ways in which devs can be very sensitive to different kinds of challenges that happen. So for someone, for example, with nerve damage, is the example that's given in chat, you don't want to make sure you have too much button mashing. That would be very difficult for someone experiencing that.
Required button mashing can absolutely be a hard barrier for a lot of players. So you definitely want to keep that in mind. And there are different solutions, like say for QTEs, they often have them an option to hold instead, but even like long hard holds of buttons can be hard barriers for people. So that is something where even it's a solution that helps a lot of people, but it doesn't help everyone. So you could even better have the option to skip those QTEs entirely if you need to.
In order to be inclusive, there are certain elements such as that can be removed and that people should keep in mind. And the more people say stuff to devs, the better that these changes can be going forward. So another great question here, which I'm sure a lot of people may want to hear the answer to, are there any kind of particular studios that are incredibly accessibility friendly that I should pay attention to? And I'm going to extend this to, are there any other games that are very accessibility friendly as well?
So there have been a lot of good, even like big studios that have come out. For indie games, we already mentioned, say, Celeste. I think this game does a very good job for this game here. Does a good job as well with its various settings. But again, that doesn't guarantee it'll fix whatever barrier you're encountering. In big studios, the latest game of Gears of War actually has a lot of very good accessibility settings, including its subtitles, and like having proper captions to sound effects and being more descriptive, and having like a lot of rebinding and various things. I've heard very good things about it. I haven't played it myself, unfortunately. I don't know if it would work on my machine. I don't have Windows 10. But so that one's done very well. It's hard for me to think of specific studios all at once, but I know that went around a lot recently.
Another very interesting thing to consider as well, apparently, according to what I'm reading, some achievements within games, and a lot of people do care about the achievements for one reason or another. Maybe it's part of like their run to get a bunch of achievements or whatnot, to not gate achievements behind something that could get in the way of accessibility. And I think that that's also good.
So there are some games that have done like very good accessibility options, but then they will either like not track your score or not let you get achievements, for example. And that is really off-putting and kind of talks down to disabled players, just as they're suggesting. Yeah. As Alice just mentioned in the chat, this is one of the first levels that really focuses on high light energy instead of high dark energy in the run, just from a very vertical layout that it has. So we run slower, but we jump higher, pretty much.
They also said something about Meat Zone earlier. Yes. I assume that relates to the color scheme, maybe?
This is the Meat Zone. Welcome to the Meat Zone, everyone.
Is that a meme?
Yes, very much so. Welcome to the Meat Zone. It has other even less appealing names, but it's the Meat Zone.
All right, this is also an interesting post here by Kathy. A thing that I've noticed falling by the wayside, which is heartbreaking in particular, is a lack of ability to resize the window of a game or lower the resolution. If things are very crisp and high visual fidelity, but I can't make the screen smaller, I get overloaded incredibly quickly. Never even thought about that. That is a great point to address when it comes to accessibility.
Yeah, that's one of the things that a lot of people would just consider as like a PC settings sort of option, right? They wouldn't think right away that that's an accessibility option, but almost all options can technically be an accessibility option for someone, which is both convenient when implemented and a shame when not considered. A big problem related to that, with trying to get those settings in place, is cold openings in games. If you happen to follow me on Twitter, you've probably seen me a couple times rant about cold openings being bad. So a cold opening is when a game throws you right into gameplay, or even into an opening cutscene, and then probably gameplay after, without giving you access to change any settings first. So, for example, I recently played through Earth Defense Force Iron Rain. It actually started out right when the cutscene and into a gameplay without letting me change any settings beforehand. So I couldn't change my controls. And this is also a problem as a streamer, and you can probably corroborate this a bit, Sky. I don't know, if you play a new game on stream, you probably want to open it up first and like make sure the audio is balanced and that it's like you can fit it into your layout, things like that.
Absolutely, and not just that as well. Some people were sharing concerns about this earlier. anything that could cause any kind of visual disturbance. So in other words, you putting a content warning on the stream for epilepsy, for instance. There's a lot of things to know about the game before you actually play it instead of just going in cold on it. Obviously, you don't want to spoil it, but looking out for things like that will not only help yourself if you are photosensitive, for instance, but may help out other people who are watching the game. So accessibility is not only inside the game, but it's also for the people who are watching the game as well. Content warnings are very important when it comes to things like that.
Exactly. But so you could have all the accessibility options in the world in your game, but if you have a cold opening, it might not matter because your default settings might make it so that person just can't experience the game at all.
Also, too, Alice did bring up the point, being unable to turn on things such as subtitles also because of cold openings is not great, because you could be missing out on something very important, either how to do a certain control, important plot elements if you're playing casually. There's so many important things where if there's a cold opening without any kind of option, then the game can't be enjoyed to its maximum capacity for each person, and it suddenly becomes not as inclusive as it should be.
Exactly, that's true. Yeah, Astral Chain is another game with a cold opening. The cold opening for Iron Rain was a bit of a special situation because the subtitles were all in Japanese for some reason when I first opened it. So it had subtitles, but...
Oh, that's another good point. The ability to pause during cutscenes. That's so important, and we didn't even get that. And to my knowledge, the first game I remember playing where you could pause during a cutscene was Kingdom Hearts 2, I want to say, or something like that. Now, granted, I haven't played the amount of video games a lot of people and friends I know have done, but that's the first time I remember that, and I believe that was in the early 2000s, so that's something that's also pretty important for people to consider. The ability to pause your game at any point. And we don't get that on games. You were talking about League of Legends earlier, Half. When you're in the middle of something on a game like that or on World of Warcraft, you may not always have the ability to pause, and that is so important in case something happens or you need to put the controller down for some reason. Again, just things to think about.
Yeah, I'm just going to call out Souls games right there because most of them can't pause. Not a true pause anyways, but let's see. So I've seen multiple people in chat say this game looks exactly like The Messenger. I'm just going to point out that this game came out years before The Messenger did.
Maybe it was the other way around then. Maybe this inspired The Messenger. Maybe.
There you go. Yep, so now the ghost dogs are being used to open doors, so I have to lead them into switches here. So these past two levels, including the meat zone that we were in, was actually the inside of the geomes, the large creatures. So I'm inside them right now and getting ready to plant those bombs later in the end. Again, because they insulted our sick vape skills, I suppose.
Question about the game from chat. What is the bottom bar for?
That is my health bar. To re-explain that, I did mention it at the very beginning, but it's good to mention it again. So it is a balance between light and dark energy, or green and purple. The more purple it is, the faster I can move horizontally up to... It kind of caps out at 90% for the effect. And the more green it is, the higher I can jump. However, if I go above 100% of either, I die. So that's unfortunate when that happens. But...
Yeah, subtitles, I believe, should probably be a default option in games because the worst case scenario, you turn on the options and you turn them off. But if you don't have them on right away and someone needs them right away, then I feel like the person's missing out on some aspect of the game.
Exactly, especially if you open up with a cutscene, laying the whole story down, and they can't hear, so they have no idea that intro is going on.
This is a good question here. Jeff asks, is there a list of common solutions to common accessibility issues that is widely available?
A common solution to common accessibility issues that is widely available.
I'm guessing what Jeff is talking about is maybe like a list of solutions to if something's going wrong in the game, if there's any like general way or place to go to fix that. I would say definitely the options menu. If there's something at the beginning of the game, that would be good. If it's something that's cold, maybe some kind of instruction manual of some kind. And then just in general, when in doubt, there's, as long as you're not trying to dodge spoilers, if say it's for a game that you played and you know the plot of and you just need to know how to adjust maybe the lighting or something like that, maybe to take a look online and see if there's any solutions for that for other people that probably have the same issue and need that fixed.
So here's the thing is that like, and they were probably also talking about hardware and things like that. And not all hardware solutions are going to be the same thing for everyone. Like as we discussed earlier with how this controller suits my needs very well, but it's not going to suit everyone else's so perfectly. So it's hard to say like this is the one thing that everyone should get that has a physical accessibility barrier.
This makes sense as well. Jeff was saying, as a follow-up, I was more thinking for companies developing games to include better options.
Yeah. So I did talk about that a little earlier, I think, with what developers should consider. There are great websites. If for some reason you're not getting a hold of a accessibility consultant, there are great websites out there with a lot of guides for what you should be considering, and even often broken down in how difficult or how easy they are to include. In a general sense, it's going to vary depending on what engine you're using, various other things like that. So accessible.games and gameaccessibilityguidelines.org are both very good resources on that front.
Yes, and I believe Muffins already posted a very good link to that will help out with just that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I just saw that. The Steam, see, you say the Steam controller there. The Steam controller would be a nightmare for me. I would not be able to play very well with the Steam controller at all. And if that were to become a standard design, I would probably get locked out. So it's a good example of just what I was saying, where it's just not going to be for everyone sort of thing.
Another question, how do you become an accessibility consultant?
You get lucky. If you're asking my path. So the first time I did that for any sort of pay was Way of the Passive Fist with Household Games. Jason Kanem actually reached out to me after watching me play at various GDQs, but this was after SGDQ 2016, which is definitely my most famous performance at this point, where I ran Momodora. He reached out to me and asked about potentially doing that. And that's how I got more of a start into that. I don't get to do that work as often as I'd like. It requires, reaching out first, and I haven't been able to afford to go to gaming conferences as I go to GDQs instead, for example. So I don't have as many contacts. But so that's a good thing. Often, like say, I know other people that do work as consultants. Sometimes they will get their contacts from those conferences.
Also, too, in terms of streaming, a lot of people are saying that you run a speech-to-text bot running within your channel as well for subtitles.
Yes, I do. It's completely free as well. It's webcaptioner.com. It requires Google Chrome to run because it uses Google's speech-to-text API. But it works pretty well. And you just kind of set that running in a window and capture that window on your stream. I'll explain again just why I hold the controller the way I do, because I know it's been mentioned a couple times since, the very start. I have a physical disability called hemiparesis that lowers feeling and coordination on the entire right side of my body. So I actually play games better doing all the controls with my left hand rather than with both. Right hand is kind of just there to supply stability, but it wouldn't be required. It's just why force more hardship on myself, basically.
And to reiterate as well, because I'm sure people will watch the VOD in other ways of this stream after, what controller do you use again, Half?
It is the Razer Wolverine in particular. It's the only one that has the extra buttons at the very top. The only one. All the others have them on the back where I can't reach them. As far as like the premium controllers go. It may have been related to a stroke, but I've had this condition since before birth, so I might have had a stroke in the womb, which would just be, well, a bad stroke of luck, I suppose.
I've been told you like puns before, Half.
I know. I didn't mean. I just couldn't think of a better way to word that otherwise. That particular case.
You are loved for your puns, I assure you, Half.
The puns. I think I'm more of a pun appreciator than a pun giver most of the time.
I don't know. I want to say that's about your second or third one by now.
Okay. I wasn't noticing at all. So.
So what's going on currently in the game right now?
We're inside of the third geome, again, to go plant a bomb. I should probably mention, like, actual story. These geomes are basically the harbingers of the apocalypse, and they were attacking the power plants, and that's why we had to go repair the power plants. And so we found out afterwards from relics from a past civilization that they were the harbingers of the apocalypse, and they tried to blow them up, but they didn't get all of them. So we figured, hey, maybe if we blow all of them up, we'll stop the apocalypse from happening, which is basically a gigantic flood. Maybe that'll work out. I'm not going to spoil that much. So I don't have a stockpile of this controller, and I'm sorry I'm taking a bit of your role, Sky. My apologies.
Oh, no, absolutely not. This has been fantastic discussion. Please, by all means.
But I have... So I had pretty much... I had a stockpile of the Wildcat, the previous model of this controller. But those kept having some issues. And eventually they did discontinue that, and I had to move on to Wolverine, which has fared better. So I'm thankful for that. They're expensive, though. So if anyone wants to send some to my P.O. box, I won't complain. Oh. Yeah, this is a standalone game. Hopefully my health is good for this. It might be a little bit low, which affects my jump height, which could make it so that I can't do a couple things here. Ooh, oh, well, that's not a problem anymore. I can jump much higher now. Let's see. Maybe I can fix some of this. Because I don't want this high of energy for the next stage. So we'll just... at the start of each stage, other than a few specific examples earlier on, you actually get healed up to 25% at least of the lower energy, whichever you have less of, to make sure that you're not up a creek without a paddle, I suppose. So as long as I'm like below 25%, it's basically optimal for whatever I want to start the next level as far as light energy goes. But this is the last stage. We've blown up all the geomes, and we kind of realized, wait, that might not have been a great decision. And now we're at the big tower where all of the light energy the power plants had been collecting is stored. And we're gonna go turn it off, basically. And this is the first level, because this game introduces a new mechanic pretty much every level that has rail grinding, where you just hold the shield above you and grind that way.
Just let me know when you come up on time as well, Half. I want to make sure I get a...
Oh, good... This level's pretty long, so...
Okay. All right, getting back to questions here. Which game have you run has given you the most problems in terms of accessibility? And what made you want to power through for that game?
That's a difficult question, because I generally don't think that much in that direction. Most problems. Oh gosh. I'm trying to think. Because generally, if it's so much of a problem, like actually an issue accessibility-wise, I'm probably not going to run it. Just flat out.
How about this then? How about as a speedrunner, what game did you almost not run? And what made you motivated to get through it?
Because I only run games after I've done a casual playthrough of them. I think that's actually a big point there. And I don't really pick games much based on, like, say, there's a lot of runners for this or something like that. As I mentioned earlier, I like to be part of the routing process. So I often do kind of run games that a lot of people wouldn't consider. But I've almost always done, like, at least one playthrough of it. So I have a pretty good idea if it's going to be a major accessibility roadblock already. Because I've played through it once, I know what issues might come up. So I don't go in blind. Let's see. What was your question again, Sky, that you had in...
Which speedrun has given you the most difficulty, and what motivated you to power through it?
So one game that I think was both maybe the most difficult and also like the most chill and convenient was Hob, because it has a lot of very precise movements in order to be able to land specific jumps. It has like basically a thrust jump mechanic to thrust your sword and then go flying farther than ever intended. That gets used a lot. But you can only do that off of certain ledges. So it's not even really like an accessibility thing, I guess, but the precision gets pretty high on that, and definitely did pose a bit of a challenge. Oh yes, I've been corrected. Not a thrust jump, but a thrump, of course.
That's a great name for a mechanic.
Yes, there's another game I ran, Armed with Rings Rearmed, also has thrumps, so... And that different name for it also came around the time that I was arguing that Metroidvanias should be called X-Plups. So I have said it's a shame this isn't a Metroidvania, because then I would be thrumping through an X-Plup. But which is just a good... By the way, X-Plup would be short for exploration platformer. just to make a little bit of sense. I wasn't arguing that very seriously. I just think X-Plup is hilarious to say.
All right, Jeff asks, have you ever ran a game where speed tech was later discovered that your disability made much more challenging?
Yes. Nier Automata. So that actually game has a lot of good accessibility features, but there is a technique, basically double damage glitch, where doing a certain attack with a certain weapon set basically deals double damage for some reason. But basically it was weapon swap double damage glitch, where you had it on both of your weapon sets at once, alternating them in between attacks. That would be too much for my hand to do all at once. At least I do have basically chronic RSI that I have to consider, and that would have been too much physically to keep up with.
RSI was the question in chat. What is RSI? I believe it's repeated stress injury?
Repetitive stress
Repetitive stress injury, yeah.
Yeah.
It was close.
It was mostly caused by work I did in a call center rather than video games, kind of ironically, but it's still, I have to keep it in mind and remember to stretch. By the way, people, remember to stretch. It's important.
Absolutely, and that includes not only getting out of your chair, but doing like certain hand and wrist stretches as well. There are so many games that are demanding, as is on its own, and without those stretches, RSI can develop pretty quickly. Oh, also, and hydrate. That's true.
And hydrate.
Always hydrate.
So, getting close to the end. We have one more of those calibration bars to place, and then we'll take an elevator up and do a mirror puzzle. And time will be when the screen fades out to black, but of course I will let you know.
Sounds good. And Half, thank you so much again for doing this. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you to everyone in chat for asking all of these insightful questions.
Oh, I missed one apparently. Which one? I guess I haven't done this one off to this side. Oops. I lied. I did them out of order of my usual pattern. Okay, now it's placed and we ride it on up. Why was killing the things a bad idea story-wise? Was it a bad idea though? You'll just have to like buy the game that is currently 70% off on either itch.io or Steam and play it to find out. This was not the full story, by the way. There's a lot more to this game that did not get shown because this is gauntlet mode. Yeah, we shut down this tower. It falls down, and then fade to black. Time.
1:17:53. Excellent job, Hath.
Thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure. And then, of course, after the tower went down, everyone went and had a beach party and was all happy. That's not the actual ending, but
I'm sorry, I couldn't help it, just the way you said that. I do want to encourage everybody, please follow Half if you have not already. Half Coordinated is fantastic. That is twitch.tv/Half Coordinated. Please give Half a follow. So deserving, and just the things Half does is amazing. And this is one of my favorite runs of his, Even the Ocean. And again, thanks to the devs for being here too as well. We appreciate y'all.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you all very much for being here and facilitating a very nice conversation. This is the end of Disability Awareness Month as far as these streams go on GDQ. So if you've been watching previous runs or just tonight, hopefully you learned something and, just to help you be more accepting and considerate of your fellow disabled players in games.
All right, sounds good. Real quick, as a plug before we raid, GDQ Hotfix is brought to you by viewers like you. If you enjoyed tonight's stream and other Hotfix events, please consider subbing to this channel. Every bit helps. If you do have Amazon Prime, you do have access to a free sub, please consider using it right here to support the channel. A couple announcements here. AGDQ 2020 volunteer schedule will be released tomorrow on the 31st. And our Halloween marathon here on GDQ will be all day tomorrow on GDQ Hotfix. The hours will be from 1 p.m. Eastern to midnight Eastern. So we are looking forward to seeing you all back here tomorrow. And again, I would like to thank everybody here for this very insightful conversation. I'm Skybills, your host with Half Coordinated, running Even the Ocean. Thank you again for being here, folks, and you all have a nice evening. Thank you so much.
Bye.